billionaire's son was born paralyzed. Until the poor mechanic discovered the shocking truth. The winter morning was silent except for the hum of engines in the private jet hangar. Inside the massive limousine parked nearby, a man sat staring at the floor, his eyes distant, cold. He was one of the world's youngest billionaires, a man who could buy anything, except a smile from his son. The boy, only 8 years old, sat quietly in his wheelchair, his fragile fingers resting on his lap. He had been born paralyzed from the waist down. Every doctor, every specialist from around the world had said the same thing. It's irreversible. But the father refused to give up. Money was never the issue. Hope was. That morning, their car broke down on a lonely countryside road. The driver stepped out, waving down a passing vehicle. A small, dusty garage stood a few miles away, and the father reluctantly agreed to wait there. Inside, the air smelled of oil and metal. A humble mechanic, his hands stained with grease, looked up as the billionaire entered. A man used to polished floors and marble walls, now standing among tools and dirt. "Can you fix it quickly?" the billionaire asked impatiently. The mechanic nodded, glancing toward the boy in the wheelchair. "Sure. But maybe your boy could use some fresh air while I work. There's a nice spot outside. I'll take him." The billionaire hesitated. He didn't like strangers near his son. But something in the man's tone felt honest. So he nodded. Outside, the mechanic crouched beside the boy. "Hey buddy, you like cars?" The boy blinked, then gave a tiny nod. "Want to see something cool?" The mechanic grinned, rolling over a small engine he'd been working on. "Press this button." The boy pressed it. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. His eyes lit up for the first time in years. The mechanic laughed softly. "You've got good hands, kid." Hours passed. While the father was on the phone, the mechanic noticed something strange. The boy's legs weren't completely still. They twitched slightly whenever he got excited. Subtle but real. "Hey," he whispered. "Can you feel this?" He gently tapped the boy's knee. The boy flinched. Barely noticeable, but definite. The mechanic's brows furrowed. "That's not paralysis," he muttered. When the father returned, the mechanic stood up. "Sir, with all respect, I don't think your son's paralyzed." The billionaire's face hardened. "Every doctor on this planet disagrees." "I'm not a doctor," the mechanic said calmly. "But I've seen men come back from worse. Soldiers, accident survivors. Sometimes it's not the body that's frozen, it's the mind." The billionaire's jaw clenched. "You're saying it's psychological?" "Maybe," the mechanic said. "I saw him move when he was happy. Maybe he just forgot how to believe he can." The father turned away, disbelief and anger mixing in his chest. But that night, back at the mansion, he couldn't sleep. The mechanic's words haunted him. The next morning, he tried something new. Instead of therapists and strict routines, he brought home an old car engine. The same kind the mechanic had shown his son. "Want to help me build it?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded. Day after day, they worked together. Bolts, wrenches, grease on their hands. Slowly, the boy's smile returned. And then one day, when a wrench rolled off the table, instinct took over. His foot twitched to stop it. The billionaire froze. The boy looked down, wide-eyed. Tears filled his father's eyes. "You did it," he whispered. But the mechanic never knew. He had returned to his small garage, fixing cars and helping whoever came his way, unaware that his simple kindness had changed a life forever. Weeks later, a black limousine pulled up outside his shop again. The same man stepped out. But this time, his son wasn't in a wheelchair. He was walking, slowly, unsteadily, but walking. The mechanic dropped his wrench in shock. The boy ran toward him, throwing his arms around his waist. The billionaire's voice trembled. "You were right, it wasn't his legs that were broken. It was my heart." The old mechanic smiled softly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, and the sound of laughter filled the dusty air of the little garage. The place where Faith was rebuilt, one small spark at a time. The mechanic stood silently for a moment, watching the boy's trembling steps turn into small, confident strides. The father's eyes glistened, not with pride, but with humility. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I owe you more than money," he said, offering it. But the mechanic shook his head gently. "Sir, you don't owe me anything. You just needed a reason to look at your son with hope instead of fear. That's all." The billionaire stared at him, speechless. For a man who had spent his life buying solutions, this was the first time someone had given him one for free. Wrapped not in wealth, but in compassion. He looked around the small garage, noticing how old and worn everything was. Then, quietly, he said, "If it's okay with you, I'd like to help rebuild this place." The mechanic smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. "You already have, not with money, but with faith." Over the next few weeks, the billionaire funded the repair of the garage. But he did it differently. He didn't send contractors or workers. He came himself, with his son. Together, they painted walls, replaced old tools, and shared meals with the locals. People who used to see the billionaire on magazine covers now saw him laughing, covered in oil, eating sandwiches beside the mechanic who had once fixed his car. And every evening, when his son ran across the yard, the father would pause, overwhelmed by the sound of footsteps he once thought he'd never hear. One day, as the sun set behind the hills, the billionaire turned to the mechanic and said softly, "You know, I spent my whole life chasing success. But today I finally feel rich." The mechanic smiled. "That's the thing about kindness," he said. "It costs nothing, but it gives everything back." The two men stood there. One who had everything but lost meaning, and one who had nothing but gave hope. Both changed forever by a moment of simple humanity. Because sometimes, miracles aren't born in hospitals or mansions. They're born in quiet acts of kindness, in places where no one's watching. In a small garage, where a broken heart learned to heal again.